Test. Welcome everyone to NorthStar Community, and welcome everyone who's on some level of a journey in recovery. And so it's good to have everybody here. I'm glad to be here. And today we're going to talk about radical honesty and the power of powerlessness. How do you like that for a way of saying that? And you know, I'm reminded, what I like about the subject today is I'm reminded that as we talk about NorthStar all the time, is that one of my friends who's a psychiatrist for VA said, you can look at disease one of two ways. You can look at addiction in two ways. You can see it as a medical model, or you can see it as a moral model. And the moral model says you just need to have willpower. You need to just suck it up and quit using, and life will be good, and you just need to stop. But for us that are in recovery, we know it's not that simple. And so I like the medical model much more, where we believe that addiction is a physiological, emotional, and spiritual disease that requires a treatment modality, that requires support from others, the ability to stop, and I think probably the subject today of radical honesty is the most important part of recovery. So again, we've been talking about toxic shame over the last couple of weeks, and you can go back and watch those if you want. So we're still in the realm of toxic shame. And again, just a reminder again, shame we need. Shame keeps us on course. Shame gives us limits. Shame tells us when we're heading the wrong way, when we feel bad about what we've done. Toxic shame is different. It's much more destructive, is that we integrate into our thinking inadequacy, that we just aren't adequate. And probably for a lot of us, even worse than inadequate. As we talk about a lot here, is that when we're addicted, we loathe ourselves. And when we loathe ourselves, we probably loathe a lot of other people too, and don't have much expectation from others. And so addiction is just a difficult disease to overcome, particularly once we get pretty ingrained in it. So we're going to talk again about how radical honesty is part of overcoming toxic shame. And so one of the things I think is always good, at least it helps me, is when I see the icons of our Bible who were very flawed and made lots of mistakes and did lots of things they shouldn't have, but yet they were able to be these really strong spiritual people in so many ways. And the point is that I think what we can see, like with Paul, for you guys know, Paul wrote almost half of the New Testament. I think 23 books in there, I think. Don't hold me to that. But he talks in Romans 7 about he can't do things right. He keeps messing up, and he just, no matter how much he tries to do good, he doesn't. You know, that's comforting to hear when we're in our journey in recovery, because toxic shame tells us things like, you're the worst person out there, you're the only one doing this, you're worse than everyone else, and it's just not true. So when you see others who in your lives who have had struggles and maybe you're doing better now, those are such great role models for us. And so we again at NorthStar, we just so much value and we trust and we believe in the grace of God. He forgives us, He loves us. Really all we got to do is figure out a way to accept that. And it is one of those moments in life where if it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. This one's true. God's grace is too good to be true, but it is what it is. He loves us. He forgives us. It's us that hangs on to all the stuff. So one of the Bible icons I always love to talk about is David. He absolutely, and I always say this with humor, he really was as bad as he was good. When he was good, he was really good. And when he was bad, he was pretty bad. And all the stuff he did. But I think he's a great role model for toxic shame. Because when you look at David's life, there's a lot of reasons for him to have toxic shame. But he always found a way to come back to God and really embrace God and embrace his love. And so just again, for you that aren't as up to date on the Bible or don't know as well as some others, David wrote most of the Psalms. The books of Samuel 1 and 2 are both pretty much about David and his life. And, you know, Jesus is in the lineage of David if you look at that. So David is huge to our faith and to the Jewish faith. And he's, we build a lot around him. And so just kind of give you some stories about David just so you can understand how he really is such a great role model. Like Eugene Peterson writes about him, who wrote the Message Bible. He said, David isn't someone that we look to look up to, but more to look at to how he lived is how we live with all the mistakes we make and the things we do wrong. So just real fast, I'm going to go real fast through some of David's stuff, just kind of get a sense of who he was. So David was the son of, I think, was it Jesse? And they were looking for someone to be king, and everybody assumed it was going to be one of the older brothers. And the prophet came and said, no, it's him. Well, then in all this, David goes out as a teenager and kills Goliath, this giant that everybody else was scared of. And he killed him because he really had his faith in God and felt protected and went out and killed Goliath. Anyway, kind of know the story on that. Certainly little guy, big guy, young, all that stuff. So that's the great story. Well, then Saul, he moves in and lives with King Saul. And Saul's like is the king. And Saul is like a kind of that, I don't know, father relationship, but close. Well, the problem is David is, again, this Renaissance guy. He's smart. He's talented. He's a great musician. He's a great warrior. All these things. He has friends. And Saul becomes jealous of him over time. And Saul kind of probably loses it if we run out of truth. And Saul decides he needs to kill David. So now David's on the run. Right? And Saul's chasing him everywhere, trying to kill him, and he escapes this way, escapes that way, some through deception. One time he gets to a city and dances crazily, and so they think he's lost it, so everybody will stay away from him, and all those things. And, then the story of David's greatness. So Saul comes into the cave where David's hiding to go to the restroom, for lack of a better way of saying it, and David could have killed Saul right there. And he chose not to. What he did was he cut off a little piece of Saul's garment, and then Saul leaves the cave. David comes out and shows, I could have killed you, and I didn't. Right? So that's pretty cool. So that's what David did. But then he would turn around and do all sorts of stuff. And he was impulsive. I kind of think he probably had some ADD in him, for lack of a better way of saying it. One time he decided the Ark of the Covenant needed to be protected. It needed to have a house built for it. And God's like, I never said that. Why are you doing this? Right? You see, so he, all these kind of things. So like God said to David, I don't want you to have multiple wives. I want you to have one wife. And David said, okay. And he ended up with 20-some wives. And that caused all sorts of problems. One time he sent some guys out to get some food. And this kind of rich, not too bright guy really dissed his men and insulted him and insulted David, and David was furious, and he's going back with all of his men to kill this guy for what he said. He hurt David's little feelings, right? And so David decided he need to go kill him, right? Well, the wife stops him, intervenes, keeps David from killing him. He gets it. David goes, you're right. I was acting emotionally. Thank you. So again, pretty cool, right? Well, then the guy ends up dying. He was insulting him. And so David takes this woman as his wife too. So, here we go, wife number 19. And this whole time when God says, I don't want you to have more than one wife. And David went, okay, I won't have more than one wife, right? So he did all sorts of things. And then probably the big story for him is, of course, the story of Bathsheba. And he's king. He's not fighting the battles he used to. He was a great warrior. He killed so many enemy soldiers. He was truly a great warrior, but he stayed back, which questionable on that. Sees Bathsheba. She's married to one of his top generals. Takes her, has sex with her. She gets pregnant. So he orders her husband, instead of owning it and saying, I did this and I was wrong and I'm so sorry, he takes her husband and sends him to the most dangerous part of battle to die, which he did. So in effect, David murdered him. So without doing it, but he did. And so then he's kind of trying to hide this, right? And so after Bathsheba does her mourning time period, he brings her in and he marries her too. So now I don't know what number of wife he's at, but he liked his wives. Let's just put it to you that way. And so he's sitting there, now he's kind of thinking things have kind of got past where it should be. And along comes Nathan, the prophet, to confront him, right? So Nathan says to him, there's this guy who had this little lamb that grew up inside their house. They loved him. They fed him extra. He was the most loved lamb. He was like part of the family. They loved him so much. Well, this other guy who had lots of sheep, he was just too lazy to go out and get one. So he took this guy's lamb, slaughtered it, and ate it. And he said, what do you think about that? And David goes, that's terrible. He should be put to death. We need to do something about this. And Nathan goes, well, that was you. And just like that, David gets it. So I'll read a little bit here. So this is 2 Samuel 12. So this is when David orders Uriah, who's Bathsheba's husband. So he goes, David told the master, I see. Tell Joab, don't trouble yourself over this. War kills, sometimes one, sometimes another. You never know who's next. Redouble your assault on the city and destroy it. Encourage Joab. So when Uriah's wife, which is Bathsheba, heard that her husband was dead, she grieved for her husband. When the time of mourning was over, David sent someone to bring her to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. So then Nathan, of course, talks to him about him being the guy that killed the lamb and all this. And Nathan goes, you're the man. And here's what God, the God of Israel, has to say to you. I made you king over Israel. I freed you from the fist of Saul. I gave you your master's daughter and other wives to have and to hold. I gave you both Israel and Judah, and if that hadn't been enough, I'd have gladly thrown in much more. So why have you treated the word of God with brazen contempt, doing this great evil? And then this is, again, why David, we love him so much. Then David confessed to Nathan, I've sinned against God. So that's what made David good, was his ability to be honest after he was terribly dishonest. But that's why they call him a man after God's own heart. But we know there's prices to pay for deception, dishonesty, and duplicity. For David, Bathsheba lost her child right after childbirth. And the point was that David's household was a raging, dysfunctional mess after that, with all of his wives, all of his kids. Like someone said, David did a much better job as king over Israel than he did as head of his household. He had so many things happen, children attacking each other, assaulting each other, fighting, killing each other. It was just terrible what they did. But how can we relate this to us then? Why am I talking about all this? The one thing that David had, he had the ability to be radically honest. And that is so important for us to overcome toxic shame. Because remember, toxic shame tells us that I'm a mistake, that I myself am inadequate, unworthy, whatever words you want to use, that's how I see myself. I do not deserve to do well. I do not deserve to live well. A rich, full, meaningful life that I hear you talk about, that's not going to happen in my life because I got toxic shame. There's no way I'm going to allow such things. And so for us as Christians, it's so important for us to understand God's grace. And I've talked about this before. I think in many ways, for many of us, our real addiction is not to substances, not to compulsive behaviors, not to the 33 broken relationships we all have. Our addiction is to toxic shame. Our addiction to our loathing of ourselves. And that's why the 12 steps are important. I take this from the 12 Steps for Christians book. I like how they do things here. So they have steps 1 through 3 means peace with God. Steps 4 through 7 is peace with ourselves. Steps 8 through 10 is peace with others. Steps 11 and 12 is keeping the peace. So if you think about it, that's what toxic shame is about, is us undeclaring war on ourselves and allowing us to see the good in us as well. And the only way we can do that is we have to figure out ways to trust in God's grace and to be radically honest with ourselves and others. So we talked about this the other night. There's some statistics here, and I get this from Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke. So pants on fire, how's that? Was that liar, liar, pants on fire, right? So we learn to lie as early as 2 years old. The average adult doesn't tell the truth, 0.6 to 1.56 times per day. All right, so we're all averaging around a lie a day as adults. We use, words are used to cooperate, but they can also be used to deceive and misdirect, right? So the more advanced we are with our language, the more sophisticated our lies. Doesn't that sound good? And the more addicted, the more we deceive and lie to ourselves and others. So one of the things we talk about with addictive thinking is our purpose is to stay addicted. That's why we do it. And so if I say to us, I'm going to use toxic shame. So if I said to all of you, we're going to get rid of toxic shame right now. We're going to quit. We're going to quit having it. We're going to quit living this way. We are going to love ourselves. We would be very threatened and have a lot of problems with that. And one of the reasons is because we lie to ourselves. Anna Lemke suggests in her book that, there was a time when probably lying made sense sometimes when we were competing for scarce resources. And like I was saying, I'm out there, I'm pretty hungry, and I'm looking for something to eat, and I find this patch of berries over here, and there's a whole bunch of people over there. I'll go, yeah, I think the berry patch is way over there, 2 miles that way, right? And then I get all the berries I want. So that makes sense, right? But what she's saying now is we live in a world of plenty. I mean, if you really think about it, we got way too much stuff or a lot of stuff, and it doesn't make a lot of sense except for it can be what we're addicted to, right? I love these. She quotes an addict, and I think these are such great symbolic versions of how us, when we're addicted, how we lie all the time. So this is a client named Maria. She goes, I would never have admitted the truth back when I was drinking. Back then, I lied about everything and never took responsibility for the things I did. There were so many lies, and half of them didn't even make sense. Maria said, I lied to cover up my drinking, but I lied about other stuff too. Stuff that didn't even matter. Where was I going? When I'd be back? Why I was late? What I ate for breakfast? Lied about everything. So radical honesty really is quite difficult. And I think it's terribly unrealistic without connection and support. We need people that kind of go, I don't know about that one, right? I mean, I can think of so many times I've had people come in, straight-faced, tell me something, and they knew they weren't telling the truth. I knew they weren't telling the truth. And so I really believe, like I said, my favorite recovery statement is one day at a time, no question. And we can even do it with lying. One day at a time. I'm not going to tell a lie today. Maybe. I'll tell 0.6 lie today, right? But the second one I think is the one I love too, is we are sick as our secrets. If we cannot let go of our secrets, if we're walking around with shameful memories, shameful thinking, shame-based living around what we've done, not done, should have done, whatever it is, we will never, ever recover. Now, when I say that, we have to be a bit strategic about this. We don't want to just tell everybody. I've had people do that before. Sitting on an airplane, I've had people tell me things. I'm like, wow, I don't even know you. I don't know if I'd be telling you that one. All right? But so you have to find the right people, professionals, trusted people, healthy people, who care about us. So again, our healthy shame tells us that we're flawed, tells us we're imperfect, and we need to change something. That's what we want. It gives us a chance to correct the mistakes we make. But being unable to accept imperfection and flaws is a hallmark to toxic shame. So I I'm not worthy enough to be honest with you because you may not like me anymore, or you may judge me, whatever it is. I'm so vulnerable and I despise myself so much, I can't be honest. So keeping a secret is what gives us, so therefore keeping it secret is what gives it power over us. Some secrets carry life-destroying power. I mean, I know people who've had they've done some terrible things in their lives, or terrible things done to them. And what does that do? It brings on addiction in some level. While it is secret, it is a big source of toxic shame, and that toxic shame will never be released if we don't allow ourselves to experience healthy shame and acknowledge our imperfections. Having dirty little secrets leads to lying, closing ourselves off, unable to be truly ourselves or to let people in. And, of course, that brings on social isolation, which then leads to even more toxic shame. That's the tailspin, right? And all of you out there know, when we're in our depths of our depression, when we're in the depths of our shame, the last thing we want to do is show up somewhere and talk to people about it. We want to go in our basements and become mushrooms and grow in the dark, right? But the cure is we've got to get out there. And here's the problem. Lying habits are kind of remarkably easy to obtain. I don't know about you, but when you get started down that path of lying, it's kind of easy to keep doing it. I know some of the kids I work with that are, grade school and stuff, there's a couple of them in there, I think it's become kind of a habit to them. Small lies, whatever it is, all those things. So the benefits of radical honesty are that telling the truth about things large and small, especially when doing so, exposes us, because that's what we fear so much. We really do see ourselves as so unworthy and so awful. And when we expose ourselves, and in the right groups, you're not disbanded or kicked out or anything like that. Like in NorthStar, I just don't really think you could tell us anything that would stun us or we would drive you out. I just don't think it would. In fact, anything I would say at NorthStar, we have to watch ourselves on judging as people coming in who think they got it all together, right? Because most of us know we don't have it all together. And that's what makes us so much more honest and connected. And that's what we need is that. And when we're not able to do it, we really create lots of problems. So radical honesty promotes awareness of our actions. It's so, I don't know about you, but sometimes it's just so good to hear someone else talking in a support group and you realize, wait a minute, that's what I did. Or that's what I thought. Or that's what I didn't do. And it's so helpful to see that. Again, you're not happy for someone else struggling. It's just it helps you understand you're not the only one. And when you get that, then it fosters much more intimate human connections. You can actually start talking to people. I mean, think about over the years when your toxic shame has really kicked in, how you have completely isolated yourself and just created more toxic shame. And I like this too. One of the things is telling the truth is contagious. It might even prevent the development of future addiction by being radically honest. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So we have to find some way of having mastery over us. David needed Nathan to come and basically punch him in the nose. He needed that. David was living a lie. Think about how David felt living the lie that he actually had someone murdered, he had an affair, all that kind of stuff. He was able to expose it and move on from it in many ways. The problem with us a lot of times, with toxic shame, it's so ingrained in us we don't even know we're doing it. That's what makes it hard. We need awareness. And we need ways to be able to become aware of what we're doing. Won't get into it today, but that's kind of what we call our shadow functioning. The part of us we don't see or we don't want to see really creates lots of issues in us. And it's so good to have people around us who can help us. Professionals, support group, all that stuff. And so I like this. There's some research out there. I thought this was pretty fascinating. So we say that a recovery is a physiological, spiritual, and psychological recovery. You have to do all three. You can't just do one, right? Well, the Anna Lemke was talking about denial, about how denial, I'll just quote her here, denial is likely mediated by a disconnect between the reward pathway part of our brain and the higher parts of the brain regions that allow us to narrate the events of our lives, appreciate consequences, and plan for the future. So many forms of addiction recovery involve strengthening and renewing connection between these parts of the brain. So, like denial, if our brain is not connected as it needs to be, denial works pretty well. It's very strong, and it can be work very well in bad ways. So what happens if we saw denial as a physiological? I like that. It's physiological. Our brain actually does things. We have to figure out ways to coordinate our brain and connect it better. We do that through our psychological development and our spiritual development. So I like the quote, "What fires together, wires together." So if I'm busy living my life in denial and toxic shame, that's where my brain's rewiring towards. If I live my life in radical honesty and non-toxic shame, then that's what my brain's rewiring to. So does being purposely honest help rewire our brains to reduce denial and increase self-awareness? Does consistent focus on truth-telling rewire the brain to create more healthy awareness about ourselves? That's a pretty fascinating way to look at it. And I think it probably is true. So we have to face our shame. We have to face our pain. You've heard us talk about that 1,000 times. But with toxic shame, in effect, it's like addictive thinking. It's a part of addictive thinking where we feel so awful about ourselves we can't face ourselves. And we can't face the pain. We just live in it, but we can't face it, right? And so what we have to do is figure out ways to open that up so we don't have so much shame that our brain shuts down and doesn't allow an interaction there that keeps us from being able to recover. So they talk about neurogating, where our brain shuts down because it just can't take it anymore. We have to figure out ways to open that gate and really come together and our brain become connected. And so I think this real fast, I'm going to talk about the gift of powerlessness. If we can figure out a way to embrace powerlessness, we have a chance to let go of our toxic shame, to get our brains interacting together again so we open the gates. But think about it. If I actually admit that I'm powerless, I really have nothing left to fear. If you think about it, it's when we hang on to stuff. We are no longer trying to uphold false standards or maintain a false image. How many of us going back and looking when our depths of our addiction, depths of our acting out, just the crazy things we did so people wouldn't know? Even though probably most of them did, right? We're no longer trying to control and be perfect. We have stopped trying to justify our actions and create excuses. We embrace healthy human shame and admit that we are imperfect. We are humble to the core, and this means we have nothing left to lose and nothing left to fear. By feeling the pain we're trying to avoid, we free ourselves from the menacing grasp of all those actions of working so hard to defend and protect our addiction. We will find freedom in powerlessness. For toxic shame, this means admitting you're imperfect and will never be perfect. Darn, isn't that a tough one? It means admitting you're flawed, like every other human being. Sorry. For all of us out there with toxic shame that thinks we have to be perfect for people to love us, actually our perfectionism is what keeps us from being loved by others. By living our lives in that humbled state, we learn that actually there's nothing painful about it, about being powerless. Our fears are about not being good enough and being imperfect are completely irrational. That's what we want. We want to start believing this, right? So we start to break down our associations between imperfection, inadequacy, and pain, because that's what toxic shame is built around. After spending time like this, we no longer feel that fear. We no longer feel the paralyzing doubts of inadequacy. We're powerless. Get over it. That's basically what we need to hear. We are powerful, though, enough to work on our recovery. So, we just have to be okay with being human. And we have to be okay with not being God. We're who we are. We are made by God, created by God. And our shame and our inadequacy are nothing more than self-centered emotions that keep us using, keeps us feeling bad about ourselves, helps us to ignore the good in us. All those things, none of that works. So I hope that today we can at least hear that there's so many people out there, all of us actually, but think about the Bible again, Paul again. We didn't talk about him today much, but David did so many things he shouldn't have. He was so wrong in so many ways. But yet he could come back, be humbled, be powerless, and admit to his flaws, admit to the things he did wrong, so he could have that reconnection with God and others. And I didn't even, talk about some stuff where he connected great with people at times that a lot of people wouldn't have. So we have to keep working on this thought about overcoming our toxic shame, and one way to do that is through radical honesty, which is very difficult. So again, I support you to come, join up, find a professional, get in a support group like NorthStar. Again, if you're local, we meet 6:30s on Wednesday night and Friday nights. Sunday mornings at 9:30, and then we have this service at 11:15. We got places for you. We're safe. You're not going to be judged. You're going to find out you're not alone. You're not that bad. As bad as you think you are, there's probably people in our group that's probably struggle as much or more than you have. So the point is, hiding, isolating, denying, none of that works. And so, again, I hope for all of us in recovery, we can find a way to keep moving forward and let go of perfectionism, see ourselves as imperfect, and be okay with that. So at the end of each service, we always end with the prayer of serenity, and always kid about, if we all live this prayer, our lives would be pretty good. So when I have people all anxious and they're all worried about everything, I always like to say, I do think there's a prayer out there somewhere. I'm not sure what it's called, but I think it's the serenity prayer. So let's go ahead and close with serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as a pathway to peace. Taking, as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Thank you again for joining us, and have a good week.